That went into the central.
Okay. Eric, you want to let us know when we're ready to go?
We are live.
We are live. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mahone Bay Town Council's meeting 1 for the month of December. Thank you. Councilor is now muted. Just want to take a moment to welcome the councilors and the visitors that we have here in the council chamber tonight. And we have the chief operating officer for MJSB and the IT manager for MJSB. And we have all you hundreds of people at home that are watching on YouTube. There will be an opportunity when the regularly scheduled open portion of this council meeting is completed. For folks at home, if they have a question, they can submit it then for consideration. And we also have a public input session, item number 3 on our agenda. If anyone here in council chamber wishes to make a comment. So we'll call the meeting to order. And we'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered tonight in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Tonight, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. You have an agenda that was emailed to you, Council. What is your wish? Councilor Carver?
Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as circulated with one small change, which is to move item 6.7, the MJSB shared service proposal, ahead in the agenda.
Yeah.
So that it would be 6.0. Before staff reports, does that work?
Yes, it does.
Second.
You've heard the agenda with the amendment. All in favor? Motion is carried. Then we'll go to the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 30th.
Did you see the file, your worship?
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Carver. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. Let's go to item number 3, the public input session. We do allocate 10 minutes for this particular item. If there are some folks in the council chamber who would wish to speak, if you would identify yourself, please, because the 10 minutes will be allocated accordingly. Who in the group would like to speak? Okay, just the one.
Surprise.
Senator Bain.
Yeah, my only comment is I know that there's been quite a sincere movement to do something with the fire hall to accommodate people who are maybe homeless and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if council has ever considered doing things other than that, because we are getting a little bit old in this town and our volunteers are starting to burn out, wear out, and die. And if there's been any opportunity to build, some of the other units like a Newton Lane and so on to attract some younger people in town to fill the breach for the people look after the book sale. And because, that's this town in my 35 years has really been built on volunteers. Mm-hmm. All of the people that come here for the various festivals, it's always been citizens who are running the show and doing things. Coastal Action, as Councillor Wilson knows, our board here is getting a little old. Micah is the same way. Mahone Bay Island Association, great contributors to our landscape here, particularly out in the harbor and so on. But Anyway, that's really what my comment is. The only other comment, I've already mentioned it to the planner here, that I think this, the planning document, it would have been nice if it would have had an executive summary on it. Like, I'm very interested in zoning,
Mhm.
and if the headline for zoning, I could have gone, did I came in to get a hard copy? And it was gonna take 60 pages of photocopy, so I went home and got my good wife to help me get online, because I'm not that good at it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, John. I would note that we do have an item on tonight's agenda where we're gonna be talking about a new project around the volunteer piece. And also that at the next Policy and Strategy Committee meeting, the fire hall topic is on the agenda for that meeting. So, pardon me?
The old fire hall.
The old fire hall, sorry, yes, the old fire hall. We're not gonna do anything. with it.
Yeah.
Okay. What's up?
My name is Betty Hutton. I'm here representing the Chamber of Commerce. We're asking that the land use bylaw as it relates to parking be set aside for further study.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment? Please.
Just me, it's Colin Kingsville. I just wanted to reiterate the letter that Alec Cloak wrote on December 5th to everybody, just in advance of the hearing,
Mhm.
because I think it's pretty important, given what you'd like to do behind the post office is bring a considerable amount of housing to the area pretty quickly. So I just wanted to read one paragraph, if that's okay. All the statements and policies highlighted from the MPS below suggest that Mahone Bay wants to encourage long-term housing options, promote flexibility and diversity of land use, and to development to provide a choice of residential size, style, and price point. So M&A architects who are working for Mr. Cloak state that, however, when the proposed LUP is consulted, many impediments to the above goals arise. And they specifically ask us to look again at LUP section 8.5.2 and MPS policy 4.2, both in development. So I just wanted to underline that because there's an enormous intention there to bring a lot more housing to town. So I would probably reiterate what Betty said, just to re-examine if we could again. All the concerns that came up last week.
All right. Anyone else?
Hi, Scott Green, I live in Main Street, 712 Main Street, and I just wanted to say that I do oppose the parking bylaws that are being proposed.
I'm sorry, you applaud the parking?
No, I oppose.
Opposed?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
I didn't wear my hearing aids tonight. Sir?
Jeff Franklin, just a question, are we going to be is council actually going to be reviewing the comments tonight from the last meeting we had on the land use bylaw? Or is that going to be postponed? I was hearing.
There is an item 6.2, which is the report of the clerk on the public hearing that was conducted. Beyond that, it's
So we will be
a
discussing
council's
it tonight.
discretion.
Thank
Counselor Bain, old habits die hard, John.
Yeah, I just have a comment for Councillor Now. Were you over at the Quinlan?
Yes.
Did you get the people out of the elevators that
We
were
did.
stuck?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
People stuck in the elevator. in
Yes,
Quinlan.
that's why I discussed it, we just got finished.
Double duty tonight.
Richard's up and down.
Richard.
I'm telling you.
Those people are dirty anyway.
Down here in the corner.
Hello, Laurie Jones. I had a question again, or a comment about the proposed parking bylaws on Main Street. And wondering whether the council and staff were going to be reviewing that.
That item is part of our agenda, not that item in particular, but the MPS LUB is on the agenda for tonight.
The way it's written currently, I'm not in favor.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for that. We have no presentations tonight. We have two pieces of correspondence. One is from the mayor of the town of Oxford. And that's, I'm sorry, there's only one, concerning the exemption of volunteer service providers from new fuel charges.
Can we just file it? We did.
Receive and file, is that a motion to receive and file?
We did it already. Yes, it is.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Feeney? CAO.
Just a point of clarity, because you said we thought we did it already. So a different letter on the same subject
Okay.
came to council at the September 12th meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah, but if we did receive and file that one.
Councillor Carver.
Before the motion goes to a vote, I'm interested to know if there is a rationale for this. I mean, would it really benefit the volunteer service providers if they did have that charge waived? I mean, why wouldn't we support it? Why would we just receive and file as opposed to asking our mayor to write a letter to support its support of this cause?
Councillor Wilson.
But I would not be in favor of a thing like this because I'm in favor of things that combat global warming. And this is diametrically opposed to that.
Okay.
There's, competing values, competing good values.
Indeed. Anyone else? On the
I
question?
guess just as it pertains to town, it is a little bit difficult to know exactly how this would apply in our case, like where we are a municipality. Obviously, it would be at the discretion of whoever's receiving this if they want to do anything to figure out how it would apply. But you know, if it was termed only to recognize fuel use like by a volunteer society that is delivering fire service, then we might actually fall through the cracks. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't be a good thing for those volunteer societies from that point of view, just economically speaking. But yeah, I have not tried to verify whether this would directly apply.
Okay.
to
Yeah.
us.
Thank you.
On the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Let's go to the staff reports, however, we've made a change. What is it?
6.7.
6.7. And we would invite our MJSP associates to give us some information on.
Expand a bit. Yes,
Hmm.
thank you. So since the proposal that it was put in front of you, a decision was made that we might defer discussion on the procurement as a shared service to a later date. In the package, it identified that that was really for the 25-26 fiscal year anyway. And working together with the CAOs and the staff of the three partner municipalities, there was desire to do a little bit more work in refining the details of that proposal and the cost sharing allocation. So we'd suggest that that one could be, unless council would like to deliberate on it, could be deferred and we can return at a later time. We have a year and almost a half before that one was planned to be implemented anyway. So when we went before the town of Bridgewater last night, we decided to defer that one. So that's just available, that we would really only be asking for consideration of the two other shared services that are in that package, and that would be occupational health and safety, as well as the privacy and data security shared services, because those are the two that would impact on the 24-25 fiscal year. So other than that, the proposal that we put forward would be, for your consideration.
So just to clarify, so the full Bridgewater Council overruled the decision of the Joint Services Board's recommendation to proceed with procurement as a priority.
No, actually, we just presented it as just the two services last night at the town of Bridgewater.
Procurement was never tabled?
It wasn't presented last night. It's planned to be presented to them later. Yes, and
But it was, it's fair enough, but was that a Joint Services Board decision, or was that a decision made by the town of Bridgewater?
it was not made by the elected folks. It was made by us as staff.
Okay.
The MJSB, in working with the three partner staffs, that we felt that we'd like to bring it forward a little bit later, because we just wanted to do some refinements on the proposal itself.
Fair
It
enough,
doesn't
thanks.
substantively change it. But it's just, we'd like to refine it a little bit more and bring it forward.
Okay,
Probably very early in the new year. It would just be beneficial to all parties if we can just do a tiny bit more tweaking on that one.
Councillor Carver?
Well, I'm ready to make a motion, unless the MJSB staff are wanting to speak more, but about the.
We're happy to take
If you have
questions.
questions.
Yes, okay, so I'll move that we council approve the creation of a privacy and data security shared service as presented to be in place starting with the first quarter of the 2024-25 fiscal year.
Mhm.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay,
We do occupational.
there's a
health.
second. Yeah.
Do the next one.
Mhm.
I move the council approve the creation of an occupational health and safety shared service as presented to be in place starting in the third quarter of the 2024-25 fiscal year.
In the third quarter. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Now. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. Didn't even hurt me. You need it.
Painless.
I think our staff will benefit from the health and safety work. And certainly the data security is becoming an increasingly complex problem. As Lisa can attest to, I'm sure.
4.2 billion records were compromised last year.
4.2 billion.
Excellent.
See, 2 cents a record.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to item 6.2. The report of the clerk.
6.1.
Back with the first. Yeah, because we're waiting for the deputy mayor. He's supposed to join us, but he's going to be a bit late. So we were
Yeah,
trying
he
to.
is on the camera, but he would have been making a comment.
Oh, he's there now. So we're okay.
Okay, so let's go to staff reports to council. CAO is here. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, now what do you
This
do
is-
at the end of the month? We don't get the real
The
heavy
short-
duty
long way
session.
The short one.
It's getting shorter, it's
No,
a
it's
little
good.
shorter.
A lot of stars in December.
Yeah.
Happy to take any questions.
We accept the
Councillor
report.
Wilson.
We accept the report, the staff report for information.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Feeney on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Councillor Carver, you look perplexed.
Oh, no, I was just trying to find my document.
Okay. All right. So now, any sign of the deputy mayor?
He's on the screen.
Is he?
Yeah, just no picture.
Yeah.
I'll be there shortly, folks.
There he is. He's here. Welcome, Deputy Mayor. Let's go to the report of the clerk on the MPS and LUP public hearing.
So a public hearing was held on December 5th, 2023 to receive verbal and written submissions regarding the town of Mahone Bay draft municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. 53 members of the public were in attendance. 16 members of the public presented comments to the hearing. 6 written submissions were received prior to the hearing, and 0 written submissions were received at the hearing. The hearing adjourned at 8:32 p.m. and on December 6th, the recording of the public hearing was uploaded to the town's YouTube channel.
Okay. Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, just to kick off the conversation. I think it's premature to have second reading this evening. I think that there were a number of submissions, both written and presented at the meeting, that have a lot of merit. And new information that has come in since the committee met late, late in October. Given where we are in the process and the amount of time and money and effort we've spent to try to get us to this when we're very close to completing it, do think there's a lot of merit in having one more kick at the can with the committee, referring the a few of the outstanding items that were discussed last evening, including the parking, a couple of the agricultural issues that Ms. Martell mentioned, and there were some other important commentary as well, that we should send this back to the committee, hopefully.
The Plan Mahone Bay.
The Plan Mahone Bay Committee, hopefully keep Ian interested for one more month, with the objective to get us to second reading in the month of January. There are a lot of developers, as the CAO has mentioned, that are waiting for clarity on which set of bylaws they're going to need to conform with. So I do think that at some point we have to put in place a new LUB. So I do think that time is of the essence to some degree, but by the end of January, we should be in relatively good shape.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr.
I certainly support Councillor Feely's comments and about tabling it, deferring it for some more discussion, and the input that we have had from the public has been very helpful as having those extra sets of eyes on a huge document that we've been working on for 2.5, 3 to almost 3 years. And so, but I do have a question at this point in the process. Can it go back to the whole committee, the whole steering committee? Or is it at council now and has to stay at council? I'm just not sure of the procedure.
So you or I can comment on this. I guess we might have different takes. So do you want to go first, or should I?
I think at the council, I don't know. Unmuting myself? Nope, maybe not. Nope. Okay. I think as a council, I think it's at your pleasure probably to refer it back to the committee if that's what you wish. I would probably caution that having it complete by the second reading by the end of January is ambitious, even if it stays at the council level. Just in terms of you've got to make the amendments, give us direction, make the amendments. And I'm off for the holidays starting next week, and then give it first reading again. And then the big thing is advertising, the statutory advertising requirements. So even if you keep it at the council level, I would caution that end of January is very ambitious and probably not possible. Going back to the steering committee would push that out a little further, even potentially, but.
Because the challenge is, of course, that we need a amended draft document approved by council to then start the clock on scheduling the public hearing. And so it's quite likely that we could get a steering team meeting together in the first half of January, and then Ian would have to work on the document, and then it would have to get first reading. So, as quickly as possible might be mid-February at this point.
Is there a possibility that this Friday that we have been holding as a special meeting as an option?
Well, if it were just council,
yeah,
but if there was an inclination, I think we were speaking to the challenge of getting the steering team together. So I guess in terms of staff and council availability, you could confirm tonight. I don't know about Ian's availability, but no.
That's zero availability between now and the holidays, unfortunately.
But if the steering team obviously could be quite a bit harder to schedule.
Councillor now.
I'd be willing to second that motion with a change in the time frame to maybe as soon as possible, rather than January, because it's very seen that January seems out of the reach. So,
too ambitious, or not doable?
That's not doable.
Deputy Mayor.
I was just curious about why we need to go back to the committee.
It was just for respecting the contributions made by the committee to date over the last 2 years. And I think it's in good hands if the committee wanted to submit, if we wanted to forego that opportunity to expand the analysis, because most of the committee members attended the public hearing and are obviously had access to the information that was provided. But if we were able to build consensus that we think was satisfactory, fair enough. I guess the real objective is that, I guess the salient point is we want to make a few changes. I think that they are more than non-substantive. But we need to get this in over the goal line in a reasonable amount of time. So however we can facilitate that, I think it would be wise to do that.
Okay.
So if that was a motion.
Is that a motion?
So the motion is simply to strike the committee for another discussion around what we've heard.
Mhm.
And really, maybe we could defer this, the second reading, for 2 more weeks or a month. And so and between Ian and Dylan, they can let us know if they think the changes that are proposed are truly substantive. We have to restart the process again. Like we're just crossing eyes and if we're just eliminating clauses or adding something, I'm not sure what rises to the level of materiality.
CAO?
So I guess, yeah, just 2 comments on that. I think that any of the subjects that councillors wish to discuss are rising to the level of substantive changes.
Fair
Ian had clarified by email, there were a couple of things that would constitute a non-substantive change. And I think that we're beyond that. in
We're beyond
terms of
that,
what's been
okay.
discussed. And then just in terms of timing in the new year, and sort of best case turnaround, if we went for a meeting of either the steering team or council in the first week of January, that should leave us on target for mid-February, but only if that's the single meeting that results in a consensus that's going to come forward to council. So we need to send out the scheduling and confirm the date before the holidays and then have it in that. So just for a sense of the time frame we're talking about. Any other feedback from holidays in the first?
Would you prefer just to keep it within council to
Yes.
accelerate it?
That'll be my preference. We'll kick this time down the road for how many years?
3
years now.
Like, I mean,
I think the
I can
committee
live
has
with
had
that.
enough time to contribute, and I think the things that we're talking about, we've discussed them at committee level to a great extent. It's not that there's, other than the agricultural piece, the parking piece, we've really talked about it for quite a long time.
If I may, I just want to sort of comment that the committee, for the benefit of the gallery, the steering committee is comprised of the whole of council plus 4 citizens. So that's the steering committee. So if council meets, then it's the members of council, not the 4 citizens. That's
The 4 citizens who are on the planning advisory.
the planning advisory committee, correct, yeah.
The steering committee also included the development officer and myself.
Oh, yes, true. Sorry about that, Garth.
No
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
No, just,
yeah.
We're still hoping you'll be here either way.
So
Deputy Mayor.
my proposal would be to canvass their opinion if they, because I think there's 1 or 2 who have a very strong opinion about two items there. They can send them via email and you can consider them as council. I think we just have that conversation.
The committee members can
Yes.
provide their inputs.
Yeah.
By email.
Good point.
I can live with that, Mayor,
Okay.
certainly. So I'm happy to rescind the motion. I mean, if, I do think that it's important that we get to the end of the tunnel.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a
However,
lot,
that being said, after 3 years, let's not cut our noses off
no, fair enough.
for a week or 2
Yeah.
weeks, to make sure that we do listen to what the citizens have to say and that we get it right as we can get it.
My bad.
So the opportunity to have that council discussion, either in a full council meeting or at the strategy planning meeting or at another committee meeting, whatever you think, CAO is the most appropriate venue to have that discussion in early January.
Councillor Wilson.
Can I suggest that we take 15 or 20 minutes on Friday, because I think we are meeting on Friday,
We are.
to make sure we understand what the issues are that we think might need some changes or
Some tweaks.
adaptation. Send those out to the other 4 committee members for their comments, which we would have then by the 1st of January, let's say. And then we can have that deliberative session early in January, and we're up we go.
CAO?
Just to say, we have a standing calendar hold for Friday morning. I've indicated that there were no other items, so if council wishes to use it, I can be available, and I imagine many councillors could be. But at this point, we have no other agenda items for Friday, just to clarify.
Okay.
It would be refreshing to have a 1-item meeting. I think it's, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and so if I may, perhaps if you can share, yeah, if you can, I won't be able to make Friday, but if you at that meeting can highlight the items that you believe are important and share those, I guess, with the committee members, but also with me, and then if we meet in January to deliberate direction, I can come prepared with some options for you as to how we will go on those items.
So
Okay.
So
moved.
Yes, Eric, wait,
Second.
need a little more than that. for the motion.
I have something down.
Would you like to read the motion, please?
As far as I have right now is that council defer second reading of municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw.
And yes, and review our next steps, Friday, review 15th.
Maybe do you want to do them as two separate motions?
Okay. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay,
So just open-ended defer first. And I don't know if that was already on the floor or needed a move for a second. Okay.
okay, I'm good.
and you're okay with that? I think you seconded, you're okay with that? On the question,
To defer.
all in favor? Motion's carried. Now, the second part was,
Well, to discuss it Friday morning, but I don't think we need a motion for that.
no, I don't think so, CAO. It's just.
No, I mean,
that's what's gonna
only
be
just
on
to
the
show
agenda
the
for
paper
Friday.
trail that there is going to be a meeting on Friday morning at 9. And it is a like a,
It'll be
it is a public meeting of council,
Yes.
so, yeah, but anybody watching the video now would be aware, and we will post notice for the meeting tomorrow. as we
I know you'll be on Facebook in an hour.
9 to 12 on Friday, the 15th of December.
I would imagine this one will not run 9 to 12, but 9 o'clock.
No.
Anyway, yeah.
Never know your luck in the big city. Okay. Don't need a motion for that. Anything else? Okay, so. You're welcome to join us on Friday. Your seats- It's a public meeting on Friday, when council will be discussing. The issues that have been raised around the MPS and the LUB. Okay?
Meetings here.
Yes, right here.
But we just can listen.
Yes.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay, all right. Then let's move on. Where are we at? Staff report to council? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for making the trip to Mahone Bay once again. Safe driving. I know your paper is mileage.
No, we'll see you again. God, we gotta get this. Yes.
Yes.
You're jumping around, yeah. Okay, so we're down to 6.3, the project volunteer piece, which was deferred from the 30th of November.
Mayor, move the council direct staff to participate in phase 1 of the project volunteer with a unbudgeted cost of $800 that will need to now be budgeted.
Seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to Municipal Capital Growth Program.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is one of two limited funding opportunities that are coming to council tonight. This one's been extremely limited. The province basically sprung this on municipalities with a 5-week turnaround. It's a one-time program. I believe these are funds that were allocated in this year's budget having to do with the CERMGAR service exchange process. And it turned out that they would not be allocated in the manner that was originally intended. And so they're being allocated in this manner, or at least that's my understanding of where this program originated. But it is predominantly focused on extension of municipal services to support housing, additionally on, as these are sort of subsets, climate adaptation and active transportation supporting projects. So what we've done is we've taken our various projects at Edgewater Street, which happen to be all of those things, in particular the Liberty Hill line, multi-use trail and pedestrian bridge and proposed service extensions. Now, service extensions on Edgewater are not currently in the town's budget. We have talked about them many times, going back to the Able study in 2018 that recommended either a wastewater management district and the imposition of a requirement for septic systems in the churches and other properties along Edgewater Street that still have straight pipes, or the extension of municipal wastewater services to serve those properties. So it's been something we've discussed from that angle. Council is also aware that there is some development potential in that area. We've heard that there's a desire for additional development that would be spurred on by the availability of water and wastewater services. So all that being said, this is a 50% funding program. The total amount here, if we put together all these projects, is very substantial. We have committed federal funding to a number of the program components, but we have struggled to access provincial funding to support these initiatives. So this is kind of a great opportunity to do that. I will say that it's a lot of money and a relatively small program, but we don't know how many units will be getting applications in. And they have already told us that the province reserves the right to award less than 50%. So worst case scenario, we may be able to pare down, but I don't think it makes sense to do that ahead of time, because then we're just preventing ourselves the opportunity to possibly access all of it. So there is one small correction. I was clarifying with CBCL and the province around eligibility for engineering and contingencies. So we actually would like to propose that we go in with the maximum allocations for engineering and contingencies, just because, well, if you can get them, you should. And actually with 25% contingency and 10% engineering, the total cost is up to 10.7 million. Which I know is a dramatic number, but at 50% of that, and we'd have an existing federal funding, we actually have about 75% covered. So we'd really be in a position to move forward on a number of major priorities. So all that being said, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. And I did send around a revised motion just because I was requested to expand on the project components.
Oh, did that come by email?
Yes, just since we've been sitting here.
Your worship,
Yes, please.
well, the obvious question is if it's like 10 million and change, then we make the full application, assuming that we could get 50%. If they pare back the 50% to, let's say, 30%, can we pare back the project, or just paring back the project, pare back their contribution?
I think both are possible. I think it would be a negotiation. Essentially, the water wastewater extensions are unlikely to be able to be pared back. So then we start talking about what other components we would potentially pare back. But yeah, those are I don't think you can get this without that component, even though they've indicated that they would love to see projects also dealing with climate adaptation and active transportation, which ours does. My understanding is you have to have a water wastewater extension component.
Gotcha.
Does the water wastewater also extend out Main Street, or is it just the Edgewater?
We've only included Edgewater here because we have a lot of comprehensive projects already on our radar, on our budget, and some engineering work done. So I didn't include the other end. Plus, we're at 10.7 million already.
And assuming that we would have to borrow a portion to complete these projects if we fund it.
Yeah, so if we could manage to get the federal funding confirmed and the provincial funding confirmed, most of the federal funding is confirmed, there's one pending application, then we'd be at about 75%. So we're talking borrowing about 3 billion, a little less than 3 billion. But all told, for all of these different projects, we set a goal of leveraging at least 75–80%, and this would be our only chance of getting there this year. And we can proceed with some of the projects individually based on the funding we've acquired from the federal level, but the most of any of those was 80% on the trail.
Councillor Carter.
I'm prepared to make the motion that council directs staff to apply to the Municipal Capital Growth Program for the Edgewater Street project, including water and wastewater extensions, multi-use trail and pedestrian bridge, and living shoreline.
Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. On the question,
Just say, we're a long way from the 92-cent subsidy that was purported to support this project over the years. We're also a long way from the original CDCL budget too. Councillor Bain in the room now. I think it's quadrupled essentially, cost of doing the water fund. It's quadrupled in 10 years. So seems to me this seems the only way we're ever going to get to 75%. So makes sense to support it, and I'm certainly happy to do that.
okay, any other comments? I'm conflicted by it. Because of the $3 million that we're gonna end up having to borrow with all the other things that we are borrowing for and we're thinking about borrowing for over the next 5 or so years, 5 years plus. Deputy Mayor.
Well, it's not that I'm not conflicted, and that's why I was asking that question, but the reality is if this funding comes through, then we would have to think other projects anyways, because our borrowing capacity will be challenged in some way, shape, or form. So it's a case of you're fishing for funding. If you get that funding, then you're reprioritizing what you're doing so that at least that can get done. Because if it gets done, it will have a significant impact on the infrastructure that we need. So we need that money if we can get it. It's just that the way we're getting it might not really line up with the priorities that we set. So I know that challenge exists. But
Deputy or CAO.
And just a little perspective around, because service extensions are always one of the more challenging things in terms of spending that kind of money. Will it come? Will the development that could be generated come? But I know that we have been told that we can reference the fact that there is a proposal for up to 50 housing units, essentially dependent on the availability of municipal services. Not to say a smaller development wouldn't go ahead anyway, but the density would potentially be made possible through this development. And the only reason I really want to bring that up is just to say that if you look at the assessment generated by 50 housing units, if we were to borrow $3 million over the 25-year, minimum useful life of any of these assets, we've got assets in the ground, water, wastewater lines that are 100 years old. So let's say over 25 years, assessment generated on a 50-unit development would exceed that.
Yeah.
So it would exceed the yearly service costs of $200,000 or so. So it's not a, it's obviously something council has to make and weigh the risks. But it's the difference between extensions and just replacing existing pipes, which we also have a huge amount to do and work happening next year, is the possibility of generating additional tax revenue that might not otherwise be possible.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I understand how difficult it is to make these decisions because they're long-term funding decisions, but at the end of the day, sometimes you put your hand in the cookie jar and there's nothing there. And we have to be bloody careful that we don't get ourselves into that situation. Yeah, that's my only concern. I think on the merits, it's fine, but there's only so much cash.
If you had the money, it'd be great. Right? And then we have to, as the quote goes, look the people in the East End in the eye. And the people who are living out at that end are not getting extended. But the people over here are. And they've been waiting just as long for their extensions. However, we have a motion on the floor on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. I'm going to vote against on this one, but motion is carried.
I hope somebody wins a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go to the Enabling Accessibility Fund, the staff report, 6.5, please.
So I'll give a brief introduction to this one. It's not dissimilar, I suppose. Council has in our capital program understanding that the existing Mahone Bay Community Pool will need replacement. At least the pool itself will no longer be able to operate with substantial investment. And given the accessibility legislation that the province has brought in, any new construction or substantial renovation will be required to meet those requirements. So essentially, this is an assessment of the accessibility related costs. I can't say that they would not to some extent be present prior to this legislation, but essentially, in order to live up to that legislation, with a new construction, we're going to be looking at about $1 million of costs that are driven by the accessibility angle, which include power doors, ramps, and other features, accessible parking, that are not present in the current facility. Obviously, we know that. So this project obviously has a long way to go with respect to its development, with respect to community engagement, and hopefully the opportunity to secure other provincial and federal and even private sector funds before it's actually able to proceed. But the longest lead time on just about any funding program I've ever encountered is the federal enabling accessibility program, with the possible exception of natural infrastructure, which we've been waiting on for the waterfront now for more than a year and a half. So getting this application in now and continuing to work to define the concept for the pool and secure additional funding gives us an opportunity to cover 65% of the costs associated with the accessibility requirements for the facility, as it is, at least in the preliminary stage, envisioned. And obviously, we try to be conservative, so if we can maximize the benefit of this program to the project, and if the accessibility costs came in a little less than that, we'd rather that than they come in more. So Eric's done some work with Vigilant to assess those costs, work with our accessibility coordinator, Ellen and Jester, and come to a proposal that we apply for $650,000 from the enabling accessibility program. It is a very competitive program, so there is a fair chance that we will not be successful. But all that being said, we're proposing we take our best shot.
I'll make a motion that council directs staff to submit an application to the Enabling Accessibility Fund for the Mahone Bay Community Pool Project.
Do we have a second? Councillor Carver seconds on the question. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, couple of things. This is in the context of what you were just discussing 90 seconds ago. And also in the context of a couple, at least, of taxpayers have come to me and said, what do we need a pool for anyway that only operates for 8 weeks a year? So I'm asking the question. Do we really need to, should we be doing this, or should we just keep the pool we've got until it no longer is functional and then close it down?
Or build an indoor pool?
Or build a new one later?
I don't want to weigh in on the question, but I just want to say the current pool is no longer functional. Just for clarity, it won't open next season as it currently is. And that's not to prejudge the answer to this question. I just want
because of the accessibility issue or the equipment that's currently installed.
Yeah, because we would need to do like a full relining process at a minimum. Yeah, and I'm not trying to prejudge the answer to your question. I'm just trying to say the time when the pool is no longer able to operate without significant investment is now.
Okay, but that puzzles me a little bit, given that part of the conversation that last summer, late summer, was about having the new pool built in a different location so we could continue to operate the existing pool when we would lose the season. So if we knew that the existing pool was defunct, that wasn't a very good argument.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. This is new news.
Yeah, I'm not sure which point we still thought there was a possibility, but I know by last spring when it was assessed, the quote we got just to like make it usable for another year after this one was, I think it was about $200,000. So that is an option still to invest that kind of money and stop short of anything further.
Okay. Councillor Owens-Croft and Councillor Feeney.
Well, I just want to remind people that it is legislated that municipal properties have to be accessible. They've expanded the deadline, but whether we build a new pool or fix the old one, we still have to address accessibility.
Okay.
So the swimming pool and its inevitable replacement has been on our capital priority list for at least this full term of council and before that. I think that the gap between the original budget, which was in the $650,000 range, has clearly been driven by these incremental requirements driven by the accessibility legislation.
Mhm.
So, we've received funding, we have funding in the bank now that would support a large portion of our match. But if this
A
fund
large portion
of our match, of our cash contribution, I'd say, half of the 650, give or take. But, closing the gap to fund the rest of it is what this application is all about. So if we're unsuccessful, I think we're back to the drawing board, to Councillor Wilson's point, which will happen between now and next July. But I know that we're talking about the pool in January, aren't we? And the first strategic policy planning of the month. So, I mean, I do think I do think it would be wise for us to apply, knowing that we can have a fulsome conversation as scheduled in January to hash out the strategy of pool, no pool, how much should we spend on the pool?
So
and
this is
forth.
not a decision about actually building the pool, it's a decision about applying for funding.
That hopefully based on the timeliness of the application.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Well, that's what I wanted to reiterate, is that by saying yes to this, we're not committing that we're doing the pool, we're just
No,
saying,
we're looking
apply
for-
for funding, and if we get it, great, if we don't, then we have difficult conversations to have around, we need a pool, or do we just cover what we have and forget about it, which will be another fight, but yeah, right now it's a very good opportunity to start with the table, let's chase it. And then
Thank
see
you,
what
Deputy Mayor. Councillor Curley.
I agree with that in principle, but then my next question is, so if our discussion in early January leads us to believe that Mahone Bay doesn't need a pool, it's for whatever reason. I'm curious about the usage actually recently, if those figures were available, I'd be interested. What would happen if we do submit an application and then in January have that conversation? Do we really need a pool, and decide, no, the town can survive without a pool?
So two things, do remind us about stuff that people would like for the discussion in January. So things like the numbers, we can certainly get them. We have them. We just let us know what you want available to support that discussion. And then as far as the enabling accessibility program and turning down the funding, it may or may not come against us in this application, but we've actually done this before with this program, because this is the program we applied to their small projects category for the ramp in the back of our building. And the rest of the building renovations had progressed to a point where council elected to proceed while we were still waiting to hear. So we never had the opportunity to access that funding program at that time. So that's a reason why, the project happened. It happened too quickly, and we couldn't actually use the funding because we'd already finished the project. And now we have the opposite scenario, potentially. The project doesn't move forward, and again, could turn down the funding. I think the bigger question is when. If we set a goal of securing enough that we'll do this and the town's contribution will be below a certain amount, we either get to that point or we don't get to that point. But you're right, if council says under no circumstances, even if the town's contribution were whatever council believes is appropriate for a pool, we don't need one. Then I think they'd probably find another recipient for the funding pretty quickly.
Yeah. Just to say, I'd be very surprised if council said, no, we don't need a pool.
If what?
I'd be very surprised if some council came and said, no, we don't need a pool. That would be very interesting.
And if it's down to at what cost can a pool be justified, then it's just a challenge to get there.
Yeah, and it is that question, and in the context of citizens are questioning the value. I think we're thinking a little more about it in order to be able to justify the expense.
And do we not have operational issues with the pool that we even would normally have now? Trying to find lifeguards in particular?
I mean, the pools have been, I think, been well administered by the committee, and they run a good show every summer, so.
We talked about challenges with that this year. The only challenge is on the funding side. Like they have a good recruitment apparatus, they have a good continuance. The number of seasons they're down, obviously it'll be a little harder to restart that operation if they're down for a season or two. But yeah, I don't think there are concerns around that. They have struggled to keep the federal summer jobs funding, as every organization has struggled over the last few years.
Counselor?
And during COVID, they didn't train lifeguards here in Nova Scotia.
No.
So that was another.
So that
Let's
has,
come back to
that
that.
has, yeah, it has come back to bite us.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Deputy CAO, would you read the motion, please?
Yeah, that council directs staff to submit an application to the Enabling Accessibility Fund for the Mahone Bay Community Pool Project.
Okay, you've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. All right, let's go to the town hall conservation.
So another one of the same, essentially, an opportunity to apply for funding, or an opportunity to consider our future capital program and whether we can secure any external funding for it. So this one is a little bit different in that we already have an active project to renovate the building. But we've been in discussions about the scope of that project. Council's talked about phasing it in, starting with, you know, the windows that haven't been completed for efficiency's sake, and any number of other conversations we've had. So this report principally concerns the heritage dimension of the ongoing discussion around the building. And for this, we have commissioned a report with some recommendations, and we're looking to see how council would like to handle the recommendations contained therein. If we want to request a change order or need further deliberation to determine the desirability of any of these proposed changes. But yeah, happy to answer questions.
Mayor, just to provide some context, so within the existing budget, there was a appropriation made for exterior renovations to the town hall that was to be started this calendar year, and the Heritage Advisory Committee was of the opinion that we should take a breath and seek some guidance from subject matter experts on the existing street facing facade to make sure that the heritage dimension of the street facing walls was maximized. And so with the support of funding, the consultant was engaged, and they've come back with a number of recommendations that would require funding. My understanding is that there has been a tender awarded for a portion of this overall work, and there's opportunity for council to say, like, proceed with that in the spring or whenever that work would start. But I think that it would be premature this evening to think that the council is going to sign off on the change requests specific to the recommendations from the consultants on the front street facing facade. So kind of reading the room and the overall context, because these are non-matched dollars. This is 100% town general investment. I think it would be wise for us to just refer the report back to the HAC and those members who have interest in it to be reviewed, and then have the HAC provide a recommendation back to council about whether the recommendations are worthwhile proceeding with, and then the council can debate when we can afford it. And if we can afford the change request this calendar year, next calendar year, or maybe we have to kick the can down the road 1 or 2 years to be able to fit it within our fiscal envelope. Because I believe the recommendations are in the $140,000 range, I believe. And if I add that number to the existing budget for the other 3 facades, which I believe has already been signed off on, we're not that far out of sync with the overall budget. But knowing that we're going to have constraints next year, I think we want to keep our powder dry on a line item that is 100% town money with no match, and we're not. So if we had to cut something, obviously this would be a place to start looking at. So I guess the cutting to the chase, I'd recommend there's really 2 elements of it. One, providing staff some support to what should we do with the tender that we've already released and awarded, and should that work continue? Should that work start? I think it should. We should do that. So we should continue the work on the other 3 sides, and I do think we should just let the HAC dive in on the front facade, and we'll deal with it in January.
What are we asking the HAC to comment on, council?
We'll review the whole report, which is really derived from that organization. And meeting the commitments of our municipal heritage designation and our bylaws and the whole theme behind a plaque building. And kind of highlighting the merits of that historical preservation. So this strikes me as a completely worthwhile investment. I mean, I'm wholeheartedly support us doing it, but again, I don't know if we can afford to do it this calendar year or next fiscal year. So let's just find out what the HAC thinks about it, and then come back to council here in January with a recommendation.
Okay. Councillor Carver, I think, was next, and then Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I certainly approve the idea of referring it to the Heritage Advisory Committee. But when that idea had first come up, I think I had thought that it would be in part to prioritize some of the items that have been recommended with a view to not spending the whole $145,000 if that was an issue. So if it was going to go to the Heritage Advisory Committee, I think we would want to be clear about what we're asking them to think about or decide or recommend.
We have a budget for 240. And I understand we have a tender that we've issued for 95-ish.
And this would take us to the.
This would take us to the 240, but the question is, do we want it and when do we want it and can we afford it right now?
And I think there is actually a little bit in the front that is just like on the front facade that like painting and stuff is in addition to these scope changes. So it would be even more. Yeah. But I think in any case, referring to HAC and having them go through and, is this desirable? And if it is, what is the priority they would place on? And it's one conversation. And we could see if Harry Yost, who did the report, is available to come to that meeting if there's a desire to do that. You can follow up with staff about that.
Deputy Mayor?
So one of the questions has been answered in terms of the budget and what this pushes things to. But just bringing everything back to the grand scheme of how much money we're spending on this building to the table. I think at some point we need to have that, I guess, logical conversation. The building doesn't serve our purposes. We have thoughts and ideas that we talked about doing a garage, and we're still pumping money into this, and that will not get it to where we need it to be from a functionality perspective. I feel when this issue comes up, I just feel that we're not doing what we need to be doing in terms of stewarding good decision making. If for it so, we'll spend 240,000 on the facade of the building just to make it look nice. And yet, we had how many people in here? They couldn't fit in here for a meeting. Accessibility, yes, we've done some things, but it's not fully accessible. So I think there needs to be a larger conversation around, does it make sense putting money into this thing?
So
just to clarify, so my understanding is that there has been a tender awarded
for the three sides
for some, and the question, and right now we should, my sense of things is we should proceed with that work, which would exclude any material amount of work on the front facade, at least, like no one's saying we should rescind the existing tender. Is that fair to say?
I would be saying that.
He's questioning.
That we should what, not spend the 93 and
just taking us all back, if this was my business, I would be selling this building. I'd probably get close to $1 million, and I'd be building something that has a public works garage and offices for the town. If you're thinking 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, for me, that's a decision we should be making. But I don't think we're all there.
I mean, I'm with you spiritually. We've been having that conversation on the old fire hall without able to get consensus as well. It's very similar theme.
And these projects were all discussed in budget and these same opinions were shared, and whether one counselor would do something different. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the whole council's. So to ask one counselor, would they not proceed? Well, it's the whole council's will whether we do or don't, and have.
So like, I think this line, this budget, this issue for tonight, there's two distinct issues. One, I think it was worthwhile applying for the funding so that we could commission the report. And I think the report's terrific and has a lot of value. And we should review the report and figure out if we want to proceed with any of the core elements and the recommendations of the report. The second issue is that the cadence isn't lining up perfectly because the report is coming out after we already let a tender. So we are where we are on the tender, but my sense of things is that the tender would support. I wouldn't personally recommend at this point us rescinding the tender. All I'd suggest is that the tender be focused on whatever work needs to happen on the non-street facing facades of the building. So, and maybe we don't need a motion for that. Maybe that's just what's going to happen because we have already approved the tender and we've already awarded the tender and there's a contractor lined up to do this work on the town hall in May.
Is there a legal aspect to canceling that tender now?
Yeah, we have awarded a tender.
Yeah.
So unless council were to direct us to take the action of breaking that contract, we are committed to doing some work. But what was committed at the time excluded the portion having to do with the facade of the building, which has given us time to contemplate the scope changes that were covered in the report that was brought forward. But in terms of, council having litigated and directed staff how to proceed to continue to make minor necessary investments in the building, we have been over this and we were directed to, and we have done that. It's come down to how quickly and in what manner. But yes, we're proceeding in phases and council would have to direct staff to do anything to not proceed with the scope of work having to do with the rear of the building. And if you were to direct staff, we would look into that. And as you said, we would get some legal advice, but.
So let's refer the report to the HAC and ask the HAC to come back to us with an opinion on the change requests. And we'll contemplate the change requests in due course.
And that's the 145,000 basically.
Yeah.
So the work on the three sides would continue. The contract has already been let.
Yeah. That's
The front facade is the issue.
Yeah.
Because it is the most expensive amount of work. I guess that's the main thing, is the other sides, there's some window replacements and some painting, a couple of specific issues with this building. But the front side, what's being recommended predominantly in this report is changing the windows downstairs back to their original configuration, which is quite a substantial renovation we hadn't otherwise planned for.
Fair enough.
I'm just thinking of the discussion around the council table about 10 years ago when we changed those windows downstairs.
And spent a fair sum of money.
Different story.
Mayor, just last statement on this piece. So to contextualize this, so we'll be spending $250,000 in a state where people are living in homeless situations.
We still have an apartment of that.
Yeah, just to just to beautify a building.
Yeah.
So that's for me.
Expensive.
It's just it drives me the wrong way in many different ways. But that's how I envision it. Is that we have the luxury as a town government to spend that kind of money when there are people living out in the streets.
So the motion is going to refer this issue to the HAC.
Yeah.
And they're going to provide some advice to council on how they would accommodate it, if at all.
That would be my motion. I hope would be supported so we can move along.
Okay, so that is the motion.
Did we get it? Did I second that?
Please second it.
Councilor Carver seconded. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. So we await the advice of the HAC.
Well, I must say, I've just deep in thought, thinking about Mahone Bay without a swimming pool or my home bay without the heritage town hall. I mean, it's interesting to think about. What do they mean in terms of our values? And then there's the values of living in a world where there's a homelessness.
Yeah.
Some of
Where's the
those,
balance?
some of those decisions sound a lot like the state of Florida.
Pardon me?
A lot of those values sound like the state of Florida. And
Yeah.
children don't matter.
We're not the only ones in this particular situation. Okay, let's go to item 7.1. Thank you with Councillor Carver, public participation in planning policy.
Sorry, I was so busy thinking about those other issues that I didn't get into this. So after the past two public hearings that we held, one around the noise bylaw and this most recent one around the land use planning, the planning strategy and land use bylaw. I really, because the expectation and the way things were carried out was different from what I expected. I had understood that at a public hearing, we, members of council, were there to hear comments from the public, not to engage in conversation. And I think at both these recent hearings, there has been some conversation or back and forth. So I found that awkward myself. I don't know how other people felt about it. I felt awkward because it wasn't what I expected. And when I looked at the public participation in planning policy, I realized that there was very little detail laid out about how a public hearing was to be conducted. So, and I thought that having more detail in the policy would help prevent confusion, awkwardness, or misunderstanding, and would support public trust in the decision-making process. So I would like to make a motion that council directs staff to prepare an updated draft of the public participation and planning policy to ensure that details are clearly specified as to how public information meetings and public hearings shall be conducted, including the sequencing of all events in the engagement and decision-making process.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Moved, seconded.
I think that'd be very helpful, Mayor.
On the question, Councillor Wilson?
I'm puzzled about what is missing from the policy now. I distinctly remember the discussion about whether there would be or wouldn't be questions. And Councillor Carver was a proponent of there being questions, a very vocal proponent of that. CAO said, no, we don't have questions at public hearings. And there was a bit of a disagreement, and we ended up landing on limited questions. So I'm confused I'm confused by how you were confused.
You want to respond, Councillor Carver?
No, not yet, because I was looking up the policy and I realized I put in the wrong link somehow.
Deputy Mayor.
Well, so my understanding, this is legislative.
The legislation doesn't provide the kind of specificity that I think Councillor Carver is talking about. So there's always been an interpretation of the legislation that every jurisdiction I'm familiar with, and I think the rest of our staff, as to what a public hearing constitutes, but it doesn't actually spell it out in the legislation. Yeah, it's the commonly held thing is that the purpose of public hearings is to hear from the public, and the members of council are required to be present to hear from the public. It doesn't say answers couldn't be provided, but they never have been in any public hearing I've ever been involved with, other than the exception that was made for answers from Ian at the last session. And he was quite judicious, I think, about only answering factual questions. But if that was in our policy, it could say, for example, only the consultant hired to support the process will answer factual questions, which is what we did, or it could say no questions will be answered, or it could say questions may be asked of council members, but they're under no obligation to answer, and it's up to you what your policy says. But I'm sure we'll say the purpose is to hear from the public, because that's what the legislation actually says. So yeah, I think that's, council's prerogative. What I was gonna say when I put my hand up was, this motion just says for staff to prepare, a draft, but based on the conversation around the table, I'm not sure we have enough direction as to which way that draft would go. So I think it may be more of a policy and strategy committee conversation to create enough specificity for staff to even work on the new draft. Just to clarify what do you want? And then I'm sure we can add specificity to the policy.
And I think also that there's a perception from the public of what public engagement is and consultation. And I think their expectations are a back and forth. It's like we found with having people come to council and do presentations. They felt when they left and no one made a comment or anything, they weren't really heard. So I think when you engage in some kind of conversation, they feel like they've been heard.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this all comes down to communication again. It's perception over, how things are communicated and how people interpret what is policy and what is practice. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from.
Yes, yeah, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering whether you want to, it may be better to take the motion to take it to policy and planning.
I'd be fine with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Policy and strategy.
Yeah. So that council refer the question of it's too late at night. The council refer the question of updating public participation in planning policy to the Policy and Strategy Committee for further discussion.
I second.
You continue to
Yes,
second it?
yes.
Okay. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 committee reports. The Lunenburg County Senior Safety Programs Monthly Report, the Policy and Strategy Committee minutes, and the Community Logo Development Steering Team. Do you have any questions on any of those reports, or does anyone want to raise an item from those reports? I think there's any motions in there. No. Okay. Well, hearing none, we will go to item 10. We do have 2 items to discuss in closed session. So we'll ask the people at home if they have any questions. Eric, do you have any from?
No questions and 10 people viewing. So
10 people viewing.
Yeah.
Very good.
Any questions from the
The folks in the room? Senator Bain, thou hast a question?
I'll make a comment, add a bit to it. I want to thank Councillor Now. I was able to observe the dedication of our volunteer firemen.
Yes.
They spent a couple of weekends, and I believe Bridgewater was involved with the hook and ladder truck. I actually went up and personally thanked them because they were here from, I don't know, I suppose 8 in the morning until 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And the dedication certainly did not go unnoticed, in my opinion. In fact, I did go up and speak to them as individual and as a group. One of the other comments, I shudder when I hear something about renovations. I know I spoke to that before about how the cost overrun to me was pretty prohibitive and totally unnecessary if it had been managed properly. But 400,000 is an awful lot of money. And, but I've already said that. And then I also read in the paper a few months later that the deputy mayor was, say it wasn't ever happen again. And I don't know whatever was put in place to prevent that from happening again. But it was in the local paper that Francis made a comment and was quoted as saying that. My mind is not totally foggy. I remember that. And anyway, that would be the other one. I want to congratulate Councillor Wilson for mentioning taxpayer. I've observed a lot of these meetings and I never hear the word taxpayer. I mean, the money's got to come from someplace. And I would shudder what happens if there's a new council coming in and look at maybe some of the commitments that have been made on which maybe have to be carried out. And maybe the money will be there, maybe it won't be there. But there was one comment where we have 75% of the money in place. Well, I don't know what the 75% is, all that money in place. I don't think the reserve fund is really all that big and excessive. And so I just hope that council will take a little bit of food for thought, that the taxpayers really have to be taken into consideration with a lot of these. I will comment on the pool. Actually, I'm a little old to use the pool now, but my grandchildren went through the swimming program there. One of them did end up as a lifeguard and went on to Dalhousie, and that's how she got herself through some university, and that's because she got her life saving at this pool here. The cost of them coming to this pool was enough that my son could move down to our place for the summer, part of the summer, to take lessons, and it was going to be cheaper doing that than it would be to have it done in Toronto. Yeah. Even if he could fly them down, it still would have been cheaper. So there's a little aside of that, but I think that's my comments for now.
Well, thank you for that.
And they played tennis too.
Mr. Bain. For the volunteer fire department, I appreciate you making those comments. I think they are the unsung heroes in this town. And I would encourage all the citizens to become more aware of what the volunteers of the fire department and their families do, that we all benefit from, and we all owe them a vote of thanks. So if you see a firefighter, say thank you.
Well, I mean, it was really a big turnout. I mean, it wasn't like there was 3 dedicated guys there. It was like dozens.
Yeah.
And I had lunch before I went up. If I'd have known, I'd have gone up there because it was offered a bowl of chili and that sort of thing. But,
thank you.
No. And I guess the other thing is what I said previous to the meeting was I think we should encourage some form of housing so we get more people coming in to fulfill all those volunteer jobs, because our volunteers are just simply getting old.
Stay tuned.
And I just hope that there's something there. When I was thumbing through the planning and so on, there didn't really seem to be a whole lot of stuff that would encourage any kind of development proposals and that. I never go to zoning, and I am a fan of zoning, you know, I said.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments?
Just a couple. I support my fellow citizens' comments, especially regarding the swimming pool. I think Councillor Carver's basically a throw-off comment about comparing the pool to prettifying the building is something that should be kept in mind. That if that's where we want to spend our money is a reflection of who we are as a town. I also want to make one comment regarding the public hearing policy. I would advise against making it too restrictive for the same reasons that a councillor has already brought up, is that we as citizens want to participate and we don't want to have to participate with a stone wall. So feedback back and forth is actually a productive thing. Unfortunately, it may make you feel uncomfortable, But I think from a citizen's point of view, it makes us feel like we are being heard.
Just to clarify, it's not the exchange that made me feel uncomfortable. It was the lack of clarity around what the process was entailing. Because I had understood that it was.
Well, I mean, I had made the first comments to that, in that meeting, and I got no feedback. But I understood that there may not be feedback, because I think some of the questions I rose, it just had no answers for. Possibly weren't considered in the development of the plan, so. I don't know, because there was no feedback, but that's what I would presuppose. And that's all I have, man.
Thank you. Nothing else?
Just want to thank John for his comments. Very fire department and
Yes,
stuff like that.
yes.
And about the commitment, because it mentioned at the first part of the meeting about the elevator rescue.
Yes.
That, in order for us to participate in doing that, a full weekend of training.
Really?
Just to go in and be able to use the equipment
Safely,
try the
people-
rescue the people.
That's great. Well, we'll say a motion to go in Canada. In accordance with MGA 22-2A, acquisition, sale, and lease of security of municipal property, and also any MGA 22-2E contract negotiations. So moved. We have a seconder. Seconded on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Good night to the people at home. Gentlemen, thank you. Let's take 5 minutes.
And Eric, you may not know that you're supposed to get their names and addresses for the minutes according to our policy, so.
John, you can take the back door here.
Maybe before they.
Yeah.
I think I know Dawn's for.
Walk out with you.